Jeff is going to introduce Herb.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Herb Lynn, who's coming to us remotely. He's actually at Stanford. He's at the Hoover Institution as the Hank J. Holland Fellow in Cybersecurity, or Cyber Policy and Security, and also a senior research scholar at the Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford. And he and I got to know each other vis-a-vis a cyber, can't remember what we called it, but it was a cyber council that was quite interesting. And he's also recently published a book on cyber attacks in the nuclear age. I'm going to hand the time over to him to talk to us about how we can taxonomize or categorize cyber attacks. So Herb, I'll hand the time over to you.
Okay, thank you. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to provide some reflections and thoughts on how to create taxonomies of cyber attacks. And to start off, let me show you some of the lists of some of the examples of what other people have done. If you go to Wikipedia, this is what you see. You can ask for it to show you a list of cyber attacks. And they define cyber attack as an offensive maneuver that is employed by some party that targets computer information systems. And here's the list. Okay, their list is indiscriminate attacks, destructive attacks, cyber warfare, corporate espionage, government espionage, and so on. And then it goes on the right-hand side. It gets surprisingly specific: stolen email addresses and credentials, credit card and financial data, medical data. Then it jumps up to ransomware attacks and hacktivism. So there's something about this kind of a list that is sort of these items aren't kind of commensurate with each other. Let's continue. From a prominent cybersecurity vendor. Defines a cyber attack as an assault launched by cyber criminals. Notice they focus on cyber criminals per se. Of course, criminals aren't the only people who do bad things to your computer systems. It talks about the ability to, or their actions in disabling computers or stealing data or using a breach computer. Then they use a variety of methods. So here's what they say. Here are top eight types of cyber attacks: ransomware, malware, fileless attacks, phishing, man-in-the-middle attack. Man-in-the-middle attack is a very specific kind of attack. Malware is a very general, very generic category. Again, these things aren't quite comparable to each other in terms of a level of abstraction. This is from a major security provider. A cyber attack is an attempt to disable computers, steal data, or use a breach computer system to launch additional attacks. Types of cyber attack: malware, phishing, again, the man-in-the-middle attack, an SQL injection, a very specific kind of technique used, DNS tunneling, and what are examples of cyber attack? That goes down a long list of things: breach of access, password sniffing, system infiltration. As you go through that list on the right, you can see that many of these things are sort of subcategories, or could be included in other of the items on that list. So the items aren't commensurate here. A prominent think tank defines a cyber attack as an attack that takes one of three forms: attacks on confidentiality, on integrity, on availability. That starts getting into the classic definitions of cyber security and information assurance, information security. Then it talks about different types of cyber attack. Again, phishing is a kind of cyber attack. Malicious software, ransomware. I mean, could you say that ransomware is a category of malicious software, or spyware is a category? Yes. Trojans, a particular kind of approach that depends, it's a particular technique that's used. Viruses, again, these are not at the same level of abstraction. Okay. In my abstract for this talk, I said that cyber attacks come in many flavors and varieties, since nobody has a clear understanding of what a cyber attack is. Means, ends, technologies, methodologies, intentions are conflated, resulting in a substantial confusion and causing many of us who worry about cybersecurity to talk past one another. So I think I've made my point in giving those different categories. So in giving those different examples earlier of what various prominent players have said about what cyber attacks are. And so I want to here I want to scope the definitions to do some scoping for this. Okay, so let me start out with saying that cyber attack is when something bad happens to your computer. We can go into what that might mean later. And I want to distinguish in today's environment. I want to distinguish between cyber attacks that target information and information technology. And cyber-enabled information operations that use information to target human minds. This is the propaganda stuff and so on. We're not going to be talking about that today. We're really, but just so you know, people also put cyber attack increasing. There's a lot of increasing discussion about cyber attack as including information operations, propaganda, misleading information, and so on. Okay, and then this question of when something bad happens to your computer, we really mean that it's something bad that happens to your computer that was caused by some malicious actor that I'm going to call the perpetrator. Okay, if it just something bad happens just because it crashed or because there was a power fluctuation in the line or something like that, we usually don't talk about that as a cyber attack. We may think it's a cyber attack, but if it really is caused by a random lightning strike or something like that, nobody really considers that a cyber attack in the sense that we're talking about here. Now, to try to identify the relevant characteristics of a cyber attack, I want to focus on what really comes out of basic journalism school about questions that reporters are expected to ask. Okay, what happened that was bad? That is, how did the victim suffer? Who was responsible for it? How did the perpetrator do it, and why did the perpetrator do it, and when and where did the perpetrator do it? And all of those words, the how, the why, the when, the who, the what, and so on, they have specific meanings in this context of understanding cyber attack. But let me posit that those are different dimensions of what you might how you might characterize a cyber attack. That you have to sort of, those are variables that you'd have to specify those variables in order to at least more fully characterize a cyber attack. And the rest of this talk is more or less about that. All right. So, what happened that was bad? Here we talk about one of the earlier slides. Talked about that from one of the descriptions. It talks about loss of confidentiality, loss of integrity, and loss of availability. Okay, so if you lose interest, so the thing that was bad that happened was that the company or the entity that was attacked, the victim, lost information that should have been confidential. Okay, really should be lost control of. Information, that is, it was exposed to people. Now, in fact, usually it's not that they lose the information in the sense of I have a book which contains information and I lose the book and you find it or you steal it from me at gunpoint. You still have, I no longer have that book and you do. So I've really lost the information. But in this, it's really a question of unauthorized copying of the information. Somebody gets the information. I still have it, but it was supposed to be confidential, and so they can take advantage of it in a way that they shouldn't have been able to. But I still have it, okay? And this is a list of things that It's not an exhaustive list, but here's a list of some of the things that can be lost as a confidentiality breach that are bad. It's client and customer information, business plans, R&D, blueprints, formulas, and so on, forthcoming product information, financial documents, negotiation strategies, research, military intelligence, political strategies, affiliations, and so on. A whole variety of different types of information, any kind of information that you can imagine that somebody might want to keep confidential is at risk here if it's been rendered in digital form. Okay. Second thing on this list is the availability issue. You're unable to provide services to customers, either internal customers or external customers. So, for example, if I conduct a denial of service attack on you and it's successful, I can deprive you of revenue producing customers who want to access your services, and now they can't. Okay? I can target them. I might be able to overwhelm you with fake requests for service and cause your systems to crash. I might be, if I get inside your network, I might be able to modulate the connectivity and bandwidth of people talking within your system, for example, so that I can delay an email that gets sent, a high priority email that gets sent out from the top management down to lower levels. I can delay that email in certain ways. So there are all kinds of things that I can do to diddle with availability. And then there's the integrity issue. The victim has lost integrity of the information or the software. So, for example, you can erase or alter databases improperly in ways that maybe you weren't able to detect. Perhaps you have mechanisms for detecting that, and you could do that, but many people don't. They don't test the integrity of their backups. If your computers are controlling cyber physical systems, refrigerators, for example, or generators, I might be able to attack those systems and compromise their integrity by fiddling with the programming or even changing availability and so on. Compromise the systems in a way that causes physical damage to my refrigerator or to a generator that this thing has been that your computer has been connected to, and so on. And then I can, more generally, I can compromise system software, application software in such a way that it produces unreliable results. Unreliable results in that they're wrong and you don't know it, or unreliable results in the sense that you suspect they might be wrong and that destroys your confidence in them. So these kinds of loss reflect how the victim might have suffered from cyber attack. The second question I wanted the second dimension to address is who's responsible for the attack. Okay, and I want to go through a set of questions here that affect the answer to that. First of all, how do you know it was malicious? What does the who mean? What do you mean by who? And what does responsible mean? So let's continue with that. Whether it was malicious. Well, there's a system failure. A system failure happens. It's a malfunction that's due to an error or a weakness in the design or implementation and operation of the system. It's a security failure if it's caused by some malicious, unauthorized access. Okay. It's a reliability failure if there is no such access. Okay, so that's the distinction that I'm making. Okay, and the differentiation between a failure of security and a failure of reliability is sometimes very hard. Okay, you have good security if the environment is unable to have, can't cause an undesired effect on the system. Okay, that's having security. Okay, reliability is when the system doesn't have an undesired effect on the environment that it's operating in. That's including the people who depend on the information and so on. Right? Security is about doing the right thing, whereas reliability is about doing the thing right. Okay. Insecurity is when the system does what it shouldn't be doing. Unreliability is when the system doesn't do what it should do. Okay. In security, there's a focus on external threats. Reliability, it's a focus on internal threats, things that happen within. All right. Let's posit a kind of attack here. Okay. Which I'm going to stipulate as a security event. Okay. A corporate computer is attacked in cyberspace. The attack traffic arises from a computer based in Kansas, located in Kansas, owned by a 70-year-old grandmother. The computer in Kansas was compromised by using a computer in Greece. George is the person who sat at the keyboard in Greece. He's a citizen of Germany, but he's a member of a Russian organized crime group. And the leader of the crime group is a close personal friend of a senior leader in the Russian FSB. Who is responsible for this attack on the corporate computer? This is an interesting question, right? Only the steps in red there are technically determined. And everything else there is a matter of a political or a legal or a policy decision. That is, you have to decide if you want to say that Greece is responsible for it. You have to say that anybody who hacks a computer from Greece is responsible. Okay? That's a political statement. That's a policy statement. Okay? Now, in general, there are three meanings for what the who means. This is the attribution question. Okay, there's the machine or machines that are responsible for launching the attack. That is the actual devices and electronic thingies that go after you. That's the machine. And that's a technical determination. But there's a human operator who initiates a hostile action. Right? So somebody has to be sitting at the keyboard to initiate this action. This is a human determination. You're trying to decide. People have to decide who is responsible. How do you know that that operator is there? Okay. And then there's the party responsible ultimately responsible for the actions of the human operator. That's a legal determination. Sometimes it's the same person. So, for example, if I'm a criminal, if I'm working for myself, I am both the human operator and the party responsible for the for those actions. But maybe I've been ordered to do this by somebody else who's holding my wife hostage. Okay, that's a very different kind of a scenario. In that situation, you would not say I'm the operator, yes, but you wouldn't say that I'm ultimately responsible for it. The ultimately responsible party is the person who's holding my wife hostage. Notice that if you know M, if you know the machine, it doesn't necessarily tell you who the person is, the human operator. And if you know the human operator, it doesn't necessarily tell you the party responsible for it. Okay? And we note here that P can be, the party that can be responsible can be defined by the geographical location of the machine that launched or initiated the operation, where George is sitting, so it's Greece, because he's sitting at a keyboard located in Greece. Or it's the nation under whose jurisdiction the named individual falls. Namely, George is a citizen of Germany. So that means Germany must be responsible. It's responsible for actions of all German citizens. Okay. Or it's the entity under whose auspices the individual acted. George works for an organized crime cartel with ties to the FSB. So it's either the crime cartel or it's the FSB. Or, well, okay. So the appropriate meaning, which one of those you care about, has to depend on what you're trying to do. Okay. If you want to mitigate the pain as soon as possible, you need the machine. You don't care who's behind it. You just want the computer-induced pain to stop. Okay. If you want to take the actor into custody or prosecute him or shoot him, you have to know the individual person. If you want to deter acts, if you want to pursue some political goals, if you want to negotiate with somebody and so on, you have to know the party that's ultimately responsible. Okay? And here are some various possibilities For who? You know, what you can fill in when there's some party here. Is it a curious individual, a researcher? Is it a lone hacker seeking fame and glory? Is it a criminal acting on his own? Is it organized crime cartels? Is it a nation state, the transnational terrorists, and so on? Okay, all sorts of different parties here that could be involved. Okay. What goes into a technical attribution? No, sorry, what goes into a determination of attribution? There is the technical, right? The technical forensic information, which gives you information, the technical information about one attack. But you can also, maybe you've instrumented somebody else's network. And so you're seeing the attack come up. Maybe the other guy makes mistakes in tradecraft. He's used his dating profile and he uses his name on it, and it gives you personal information away, and so on. Maybe he's used the same techniques or weapons before. Okay, they're operational security failures. They discuss stuff on communications, on insecure communications media. They receive help from careless sources. Okay, so for example, at RSA, Rob Joyce, who's the head of cybersecurity at NSA, said that there's been an enormous amount of hacking in the Ukraine war, and you know and that there were various actions that were taken to help shut off some of those attacks. And then people said, "How did you know?" So, well, I mean, you know, how do you know this? And his response was, "How do we know?" He said, "Really? We're NSA. We heard them say we got screwed. They can't get their money out. They can't buy infrastructure and so on." So listening to conversations gives you information. Okay. And then geopolitical context and demands and so on, they give you some information too about who might be responsible. The major point is attribution to all source intelligence, not just not a question of technical intelligence. What's really hard is prompt attribution. It takes time to analyze clues. Okay. Why does the who matter? Well, maybe you need to engage with the perpetrator. Maybe the perpetrator has to give you the way of repairing damage to your system. For example, they have to give you the key for decrypting your files. Okay. Maybe you want to claim justice, to seek retribution, to prosecute them. Maybe you want to understand the scope and nature of the threat. If it's coming in from a nation state, maybe they're particularly hostile, and they have particularly sophisticated methods for doing things. Okay, and sometimes insurance claims depend on the who. Okay, they will not. An insurance company may not pay out if a certain attack is done by a nation state versus if the same kind of attack is done by an individual. Okay, so there are those kinds of issues. Okay, and then when you say when there's a state involved, what does responsible mean? What does the phrase responsible mean? A definition of state responsibility. Here are several definitions. I offer 5 definitions of what state responsibility could mean. Okay, could be state tolerated. The state does nothing to stop a third party from doing something. So this is what happens often with Russian hackers and so on. The Russians say to the Russians say to us, say to the Russian hackers, go hack something. And if you want to hack something, that's fine. Just don't touch our stuff. If you come after our stuff, you're in big trouble. But if you go just hack somebody else, we'll just let you go, and we're gonna turn a blind eye to it. Okay, that's state tolerated. Okay. State could encourage it. State could direct it. State could conduct it themselves, and so on. Okay, so there's all kinds of ways in which the state could be responsible. You get to decide what you mean by state responsibility, and then I'll tell you the laws and policies that might apply to that. Definitions of human responsibility are similar. Okay, self-directed. It could be human responsibilities. I chose to do this, or I was forced to do this, or I did this for hire. Okay, various levels of responsibility attached to those kinds of actions. Okay. All right. I have to point out here, this may seem like a diversion. It really isn't here. In many cases, what we call a cyber attack involves multiple steps. Okay? A cyber attack is we can look at it as an activity or an action that has a damaging or destructive impact on a computer system or network. The attacks are the fundamental building blocks of cyber activity. Attacks generate effects, changing the state of the target. Okay. An operation is a series of attacks sequenced and coordinated with some unifying theme. For example, collecting ransom from a corporation, obtaining a large credit card database, destroying computers and on a network, and so on. That is, this is something that has to happen. That many things have to happen here. Many different things have to happen to accomplish the ultimate goal. Okay, and then a cyber campaign is one in which you have several cyber operations aimed at achieving strategic and operational goals. This is more relevant to activities conducted by governments. The problem here is that in practice, all of these terms are designated, are called cyber attacks. Okay, and that leads to an enormous amount of confusion. So it's a cyber attack when I compromise your password. You've been cyber attacked. Okay, and it's also a cyber attack when when the Target Corporation has had a massive data base of contacts and credit card numbers and so on taken from it, and so on. Those are both cyber attacks. Now, these span such a large range of possibilities that it doesn't make sense to call them both cyber attacks in the same. But yet, that's the way people refer to them. Okay. I don't intend to go over the slide here. These are some of the activities. This comes from the MITRE attack framework. And you can just, some of the things that you do in an adversary net. You collect reconnaissance information, you run malicious code, you move throughout the network, you send information back to the mothership, you steal passwords, and so on. There's a variety of things that you do. These are the activities that get coordinated within an operation. Okay, so these are the key elements. What do you need to conduct a cyber attack? Well, you need access to the targeted system, which could be technical or could be social or could be a combination of the two. Technical access usually comes over through the internet, but close access could be in the supply chain. It can be through somebody going in with a USB key. It could be burglary, right? Somebody breaks into your house. Or breaks into your shipping dock and does something on the shipping dock with your computers. Okay, it could be a social access that I can persuade somebody to let me into the office to do something. Users and operators are targets of social access. Vendors and service providers are targets. The janitor is often somebody who will let you in. It also takes a vulnerability to be exploited, and vulnerabilities are everywhere. They're in software, they're in the hardware, they're in communications channels, there's a configuration because you could allow weak passwords, you can leave ports open, and so on. Okay. On the unauthorized wireless access, this is an interesting thing. This little guy here is a Wi-Fi. You can get it for $50 or something like that on Amazon. I can plug it into the back of my computer, and now it turns it into a Wi-Fi broadcasting station. Okay, and when was the last time you looked at the back of your computer? Okay, so there's all sorts of things that you can. That of course requires close access. So there's all kinds of vulnerabilities that are out there. Okay. We talked about this here, these various compromises define the effects of a cyber attack: compromise integrity, exfiltrate confidential information, compromise availability. Okay. Why does the perpetrator do it? They don't do it for fun. They do it because there's some ultimate goal. They get a financial return. They want to disrupt business operations. They want to get revenge. They want to just for laughs. They want to harass people. They want to generate political change, corporate change, force changes in behavior, and so on. Maybe they want to cause physical damage. They may want to destroy public confidence in a corporation, in a government, in an election system, and so on. When did the perpetrator do it? Well, there are several times that are of interest, okay? When did the incident occur? Okay, the attacker, remember, the attacker is likely to take precautions to see precautions to conceal the penetration and hostile activity. Okay? So it may be that when you discover the incident, the actual penetration took place a lot earlier. So in 2021, IBM identified, found that it took on average 212 days to identify that a breach had occurred. Okay? Mandiant has found that most 90% of all incidents don't generate any alerts, and 53% of successful attacks aren't detected at all. Okay, these are not encouraging figures. And then another time, another moment when you can say, well, we have fully contained the breach. The breach is now, we can say now this is over. IBM found 75 days to contain the breach, to figure out what was taken, to remediate, to clean it up, to figure out what was taken, and so on. So this is the when. This is the when part of it, and the where part. Okay, where did the perpetrator do it? Well, there are many answers to that. Okay, it can be where the attack systems were located, where the attack systems were penetrated. So how can those be different? For example, if there's a supply chain attack, okay, your computer comes to you and it arrives on the loading dock, okay, and it gets somehow it gets into your hands. But that computer has been through many different things. Somebody was a final integrator of parts. They assembled all the parts together, but those parts came from many different places, and subcomponents of those parts came from other places. And every one of those places is a place where something could have happened to your computer to create a security vulnerability. Every one of those places. And so maybe it happened in Malaysia, maybe it happened in Taiwan, maybe you're located in California, maybe it happened in Texas, and so on. So all of these things, where were the modifications, the unauthorized modifications made? Let's say they include some software. Who knows where the software came from? Was the software written in Russia? Maybe the problem was originated in Russia. Okay. And you have to ask the question of where the attackers were located when they conducted the attack. That might be relevant too, okay, for reasons which I'll say in a minute. Why? Because, for example, if the attackers are located in a hostile nation like Russia, you're never going to get access to them. But if they're located in a friendly nation, you might be able to have investigators on the ground there. And you might be able to get those investigators to go interview and talk to the guys who attacked you. You get much more information that way. Let's say they have their computers there. You may be able to seize their computers and get information from their computers. Okay, if they're located in a place where you have some friendly relations with the host government. So where affects the resources available that can be deployed on site to respond and to investigate. Okay. So the lesson that I want to draw here from all of this is that creating taxonomies of cyber attack is inherently a multi-dimensional process. And these lists of cyber attacks do all sorts of conflation of various categories, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But really, a full characterization of a cyber attack, or perhaps more precisely, an offensive cyber operation, really requires answers in all of these dimensions that we see here. This is, of course, a repeat of the earlier slide. Okay. Some things you shouldn't be doing when you try to create a taxonomy. Okay, you don't want to conflate answers of different dimensionality from different dimensions. So, for example, in the Wikipedia, we talked about an indiscriminate attack versus a destructive attack, suggesting somehow that an indiscriminate attack can't be a destructive attack. That's ridiculous, right? Corporate espionage versus hacktivism. Well, no, corporate espionage might happen as a result, might be a way in which hacktivists conduct their business, okay? We talked about as prominent security vendors, ransomware versus zero-day exploit. Well, maybe I achieved the penetration to do the ransomware necessary to do the ransomware by using a zero-day exploit. Phishing versus a denial of service attack. Phishing is just a way of getting credentials. Could be just a way of getting credentials, which I can now use for anything, including a denial of service attack. Okay. Big technology provider talked about SQL injections versus phishing. Very specific technique versus a very general technique for gaining access. Okay. You don't want to conflate a component of the operation with the operation itself. So, this think tank that says that, malwares versus Trojan. Trojan is an example of malware, okay? And then the last point is, don't base your taxonomy on what is most salient in the public eye. That is, you don't want to, most of these taxonomies and so on are written and they're rewritten and so on based on what the headlines are. If there's a big spat of ransomware lately, then we have a lot of, then ransomware has to get up into the, into these lists of the top 10 kinds of, types of cyber attacks and so on. That's not what the taxonomies are for. Lastly, I was asked to try to build on what I've said here to characterize resistance to different kinds of attack. I made this point earlier. The how and the who matter because historically there's been a correlation between the position on the attacker hierarchy and technical sophistication and resources available for posing a threat. So that means, for example, it is different if you are facing if the threat that you're facing comes from your lone individual unhappy teenager versus a nation state. The nation state is a lot more powerful in coming after you, right? The nation state has intelligence resources, intelligence agencies to help. It has a lot more money available. It has a lot more resources. It will, it can come in. It has the ability to break into your facilities. It has the power to exert diplomatic pressure and so on. The teenager doesn't have all of those. So that's the argument as to why who matters. Okay, and you have to worry that if it's sort of a person that's sort of high on the on the threat list, like nation states and so on, it's going to be a bigger threat, and you're going to be more vulnerable to it. Okay, there is some talk, and this is increasingly important. That attack as a service, you have software as a service and so on, you have attack as a service now. You can now hire hacking services. All you need now to conduct a cyber attack is a credit card, stolen credit card. And you can pay for hacking services. Now you don't need security expertise, you just need a willingness. And you just pay somebody to do it. Now that's not not all hacking services are available that way, but many are, and it's going to become increasingly so in the future. So you'll be able to buy increasingly sophisticated stuff through the darknet. If you are targeted by a determined attacker, you will eventually be penetrated and hacked. There's just no question about that. That is, if the attacker is a sophisticated nation state and they come after you, you will eventually be penetrated. It may take a while, it may take an hour, it may take a day, it may take a week, but you will eventually be penetrated. In general, what you have to hope for is that your defenses are strong enough so that the guy will give up and go off to somebody else, go after somebody else who will be easier to get after. So it'll go away. But if he's just going to come after you, eventually you're going to lose that. Next point is that there are few, really no, but to save my, I'll cover my ass here and say there are a few metrics for cybersecurity that are independent of the threat model. That means an operational aspect. So you can't say, here is the system on this CD-ROM that I'm going to load into your system, and say that this is a secure system, or this is a 79% secure. That doesn't make any sense at all. It depends on the threat model. If the threat it has to be calibrated against a particular kind of threat, and don't believe anything that when you're talking to security vendors and so on, and system vendors, if they can't answer the question, what is the threat model that they're based on, then you have permission to walk away, because it means that they don't understand what they're talking about. Similarly, for operational use, that stupid decisions in configuration can make a system much more vulnerable, as we know. And if the system administrator allows you to put in, weak passwords, for example, or even worse, to have default passwords that are listed on the internet, that is not a secure system. But that will never come up in an evaluation of the system's security, because the system is, if you just look at the system alone, operator, configuration, network configuration, and so on, that doesn't necessarily come up. So you have that problem. And only operational security matters, right? It's only the system as deployed and is operated that matters. And so if you're concerned about trying to ascertain resistance, I suggest that the most important thing is to get a good red team. Have a red team come after you, have your own red team come after you, and get an estimate for what they find, and believe them when they say, oh, your system was really easy to get into, or it was pretty hard. We got in, but it took us a lot. Okay, that's useful information. And with that, these slides are available to anybody. The organizers of the conference have the slides, and you can ask them for that, or you can send me an email here if you want to talk about it. And so with that, I will return the mic. I think my time has expired, as they say, and I'm happy to entertain discussion and argument and disagreement.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hi. So you talked about security of the environment. Could you define what you mean by environment, and whether or not, it's something that has to do more like with the social engineering part of the attack, or something that is more like in the software, in the machines, in the hardware?
Well, what I was referring to was, I was trying to distinguish between security and reliability. That is, I have a computer that's operating, and if it's a reliability failure, it affects the environment in some way that is undesirable. That there's a glitch in it that's not caused by some external actor, but that causes some bad information to flow into the environment that now has an effect on it. That's what I meant by that. Your question, but I think the question that you're asking has to do with the environment in which computing occurs, and you're asking about the security dimensions of that. And yes, the environment. It's always important to think about the environment of computing of a system in which the system is embedded. So that point is very important. You can't just look at the system's technology in isolation. You have to look at the people around it, the laws, the regulations, the policies, the organizational culture, and so on, to get a full understanding of the system as it will actually be operated. I mean, this is the simplest example. All of you have seen a situation in which you've seen a door that says, do not prop open this door, and it's propped open with a brick. And you've all seen that. And why is that? It's because the need for convenience outweighs the need for security. And mostly that's true. And it helps people to get work done to ignore security. And so you have to take that kind of consideration into account when you're assessing security. And that's very, very hard to do. That's why I say, and only red teams will find that out.
Hi, very interesting talk and overview of cybersecurity. I had two questions. First was, in case I missed it, but what do you think about willing data breaches or data privacy breaches, where some social media outlet might willingly give user data to a government or some other organization? So does that come into the definition of cybersecurity? And my second question was related to use of open source software. So there's like a lot of talk of using AI in industry these days. So does that open the vulnerability even more if we use open source software for, say, AI or other data analysis tools or techniques?
On the first question about you're asking what was the first question again? You said about repeat the first part of it again.
Yeah, that was about social. Company. Data being exchanged.
Right. Yeah, that's right. If a company willingly gives up, that is a very good. In fact, that's a very good example. Okay, what's the threat model? The threat model of a social media company might well be it wants to resist hacking from the outside. But if the CEO is under pressure from the government, and he says, and the government says, please give us this data, and the CEO says, okay, here's the data. Now, that's not a part of the threat model. So is that a cybersecurity breach? That's an interesting question. I think that you could make the argument that it is not a cybersecurity, it's not a technical breach of security, but it certainly is a violation of the expectations of the users. Okay, and so this is what you just offered there is a very good example of how the social context and the organizational context and the legal context shape what we think of as, quote, cybersecurity. That is, it's not just, it can't be regarded as just a technical thing. And I think most people would not count that as an attack, but perhaps they should. And you have to decide whether or not that's within the scope of what you want to think about. On this question about open source and AI, I don't think that there's nothing special about AI. Open source is a vulnerability in certain ways because anybody can make changes to the code and so on. And you can choose. The claim is that you can look at the open source and decide yourself whether it's a problem. Well, we have lots of examples of open source code which contain security bugs in it, in which the vulnerability existed for years. So it's been very hard. And I think that so yes, there are, and yes, the same will be true for AI, for facial recognition. Where did they get all those images for facial recognition? Well, maybe some people they scrape the internet. Okay, well, maybe you can, if I know that I'm going to be scraped, maybe I can pollute the data in some way. Don't know. I mean, there are all kinds of risks like that. So yes, it does introduce risks.
All right, question of a different sort. In the IT space, especially with system architecture, there's been a movement from east-west type model, so very, very firm borders between outside internal networks to a zero trust model, because of the understanding that most of the time there's a breach that is undetected, as you mentioned earlier. One of the questions I've got is, with the taxonomy of, as a really thorough breakdown that you've done, is that, especially with the response of different sorts of networks and different structures, has there been any studies of different responses for with different type of network structures and the type of responses or type of recovery of certain types of networks yet. People are advocating zero trust, obviously, but let me put it this way, there's been very little actual, or at least people are not disclosing actual real world studies where that's actually happened to a zero trust type network. So anyway, your thoughts?
Well, okay, so zero trust, essentially what zero trust means, as far as I can tell, is that it's just another buzzword. It's what I learned the concept of, like 15 years ago, is sort of the principle of mutual suspicion. That is, you never assume that the party or entity or component that you're talking to is trustworthy. That you take into account the fact that what the inputs that you get, whether they be informational or operations or something, you never assume that those inputs are valid and benign, and you take into account the possibility that they're not. And so this, now in a zero trust environment, what it means is that every aspect every component has to be suspicious of every other component, and that's all it means. And there is overhead in doing that. Now, I'm not sure. I think your question is, are networks built like that actually more secure? I can't answer that. I mean, I don't know the data on that, but I certainly do know that there have been network failures, security failures that have occurred in large systems because that principle has not been followed. So I think that's, you can say, well, if you follow that principle, will you eliminate those? Well, I think that most people believe that you will reduce them, but no, I don't know any specific studies that show that you actually reduce them.
Yeah, got it. I mean, zero trust is definitely difficult to implement because you not only have to verify, authorize the user, but then you have to authenticate each transaction and log each transaction. At least that's
exactly
right, as it's properly done. But if you miss any of those steps, then you have suddenly introduce a whole gap in the whole system.
That's right, and that's right. And not only do you have to authenticate, you have to make sure, because somebody might have compromised the authentication, you have to validate the input.
Yes.
And all of that's a big hassle. How much do you believe that somebody who says I'm implementing a zero trust architecture is actually going to do all of the steps every time? I mean, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I know what they should be doing. I don't know, nobody should be propping up the door with a brick.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I've got a final question for you, Herb. I don't think I've asked you this before, but there's been a number of companies, startups that have come along offering cyber risk assessment services. Do you have a view on how good their data are and whether there are better or worse places to get data on cyber attacks? What's your thought there?
On cyber risk, even in terms of the risk that a system, the sort of the resilience of the system, or on the threats that these guys will be facing?
Both. So the volume of threats, or the frequency of threats, severity, and then the ability to resist.
Well, certainly a lot of companies go after the second kind. They try to get, so they go through compliance checklists, for example. They say, do you require two-factor authentication? Check or not? No check. Okay, something like that. And so they get there is some information in that. Maybe it's not much, but it's better than nothing. So there's some information. As to whether or not they how vulnerable they are, how valuable their stuff is to outsiders, I don't know of any. I don't know of systematic studies that do that for companies, and I'm not certain what they would, I'm not certain of what they would say. I think that I think that when that happens, it's much more along the lines of the assessor comes in and says, and asks you, what are your prize jewels? What are your crown jewels? What do you most need to protect? And let's look at what a bad guy might want to do to come after them. But I don't think they, to the best of my knowledge, they don't survey the entire array of universe of bad guys and say of which bad guys would come after you. I don't think they do that. And at least I haven't heard of any. If you know of some, I would love to hear what they do, but I don't know of any.
All right, thanks very much for your time, and
Good, thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
So I will turn it over to Bob.